So our Torah portion this week is Parashat Re'eh, which means see, like look. And Harry, would you please share the text? You'll see it on the screen in a moment, and you can also, you see there in the chat a link to the source sheet as well if you'd like to download it. But you see here, this is kind of the beginning of the Torah portion, is where I want to begin the teaching today. So it begins by saying, see, this day I set before you blessing and curse. Anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. And this is, God's voice, speaking to the people. Blessing if you obey the commandments of God, and then curses if you don't obey the commandments of God. So I want to just ask your cooperation in just bracketing that. I see. I see. I have to change the permissions on the source sheet. Sorry. I think Harry can take care of that. If not, when I'm done teaching, I'll do it. So stay tuned. We'll get you that source sheet. But if I could just bracket the theological assumptions that are in this text, which is, and they're worth unpacking, I should say. But in the brief time we have together, I want to just kind of bracket them. This text is making certain claims theologically that can be understood in a lot of different ways, and our sages have wrestled with them, and for sure we should as well. But I want to hold on and really raise up an element that I think is really applicable to our practice and certainly our lives. And, of course, we're not only just speaking about this abstractly, but really we're of course honoring that we're coming into this encounter with Torah and our practice in the midst of our real lives. And I don't need to tell you that it's a very difficult moment that we're living in for all kinds of ways. And even if the world was in perfect, peaceful shape, still in our lives, we would have all kinds of challenge and difficulty. Our families, our bodies, our relationships, our work, etc. And so that's kind of the context, right? We're coming into this from the perspective of the reality of our lives. And here the Torah says, look, before you see things. And when I say see, I don't just mean visually with our eyes, but it's a deeper kind of perception, right? So this isn't limited to just those who have the capacity of vision. This is a broader human capacity of perceiving the world. So the text is inviting us to come into an orientation of paying attention. And of course, that's at the heart of our mindfulness practice. Moment by moment, we're paying attention to what's happening. We're looking. Even if our eyes are closed, we're looking at what is arising internally, moment after moment. And of course, we see how in any given moment, there's so many different levels and elements of our experience. And of course, there's the question always of what do we pay attention to in any given moment? I often think about this when I look outside and I see a tree with leaves. And if you look up at the top of the tree, often there's a lot of movement in the leaves as they're being blown by the wind. And my first tendency is for my eyes to go right to that movement and to pay attention to the movement. But then sometimes I remember that if I look beyond that and kind of widen the frame, widen the lens, I take in that broader view, which includes that wide open sky. And I could also look at that. Both are happening simultaneously. And if I were to say, what is true, both are true. So there's a tendency to look at that which is arising that has a lot of movement, that maybe, especially if it seems threatening, if it seems like it needs to be figured out or somehow solved, that will naturally draw our attention. That doesn't mean we're a bad person or meditator. That's just simply a function of how our sensory selves work. But one of the capacities that we're training in our practice is feeling empowered to also widen that frame and even to turn our attention from one thing to the next. So to know, okay, like I can just look at the movement of these leaves, but I can also look beyond them and open myself to and really bring in that wide open blue sky. Both are possible. There's another element to this, and also there at the bottom of the page is another beautiful example of a similar formulation that we find later in the book of Deuteronomy. This first source from chapter 11 is in this week's Parsha, but then we see in Deuteronomy 30, right after the famous passage of Lo v'shamayim hi, it's not in the heavens, but rather this teaching is in your heart, in your mouth, to do it. We have this verse, Re'eh natati lefanecha hayom, et ha'chaim ve'et hatov ve'et ha'mavet ve'et hara. See, I set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. There's a way in which part of what we're paying attention to in our practice is not only just the bare information that's coming in. I'm looking and I see the leaves on the tree, but we're also seeing our reactions, our habitual reactions to what arises. And the way I read this text and the one above from our Torah portion, or one way I want to suggest that we read it, is in the way of witnessing natural consequences. And that idea of natural consequences is something I believe my wife first, introduced me to that idea is probably when we were early parents. And the idea, is parents teach their children, and certainly when I was a camp director, this was also a big part of how we thought about educating our campers ethically, is that we encourage them to witness what are the natural consequences. When I do this, what happens? If I leave my shoes outside and it rains, the natural consequence is that they're wet. If I am mean to another person, the natural consequence may be that that person doesn't want to be with me. So it's another level of paying attention to what's arising. When something happens, what follows? What comes from that? So in our practice, we can notice those things as they arise, and if we may come across some really interesting information about ourselves that we may not have known before. And so, excuse me, I would encourage you to notice those things, and it may even be helpful if you have a pad of paper, not to write a whole journal entry, but even just to write yourself a little note to remind yourself of that idea so that you can then return back to your practice. Because in our meditation practice, we're really intending to not spend that whole time like unpacking all these dynamics. It's more like we're having a dedicated period of time to just see what's arising and then returning back to a place of presence. Now, just briefly, and Harry, if you could go to the next page on the source sheet, please. And thanks for also fixing the permissions so people could access the document. Appreciate it. I just want to touch upon this text very briefly now. It really just raises up a couple of ideas in it. And then after our session of meditation at 1 o'clock Eastern, for those last 10 or 15 minutes, maybe we'll look more closely at this text. But it's a beautiful text that comes from the Sfat Emet, one of our great Hasidic masters. And I wanted to bring it because, especially as we're meeting today on Friday, there is a classic distinction in Jewish jurisprudence and actually in other areas, philosophy, concerning the difference between ri'iyah, seeing, and edut, witnessing. So in Jewish law, for example, like you could look in Mishnah Torah and see how the Rambam in Hilchot Edut, in the laws of witnessing, talks about like what makes for a good witness. What does it mean to witness? But for our purposes today, I really wanted to raise up first of all, that there is a distinction. And in our practice, we have this element of ri'iyah, of like seeing and perceiving what is arising. Like, oh, I'm noticing this happens and that happens, and I could look here, I could look there. But then edut, witnessing, is understood as a deeper kind of experience that includes that perception, but there's something transformative that's also occurring internally. And it also is seen as like just a deeper kind of experience that involves the pnimiyut, the inner essence more. And one of the beautiful ways in which this idea of edut is found, witnessing, is in regards to Shabbat. And the Sfat Emet here brings a teaching from the Zohar, one of our great medieval mystical texts, which says, Visahaduta ikri, that Shabbat is called a witness, witnessing. And the Sfat Emet goes on to talk about how the essence of the experience of Shabbat Menucha, Shabbat rest, is edut, witnessing. So in our practice today, I want to invite us to maybe hold these two ideas of ri'iyah, seeing, perceiving, and edut. And maybe today is a good day to really incline on the edut side of the equation. Harry, you can stop the share now. Thank you. Excuse me. And so my invitation is really to practice with an orientation of edut. Let's focus on that. And by that I mean that we're present with our experience and holding it from a quality of menucha, which is understood as a quality of rest, which I think about and really experience first and foremost in my body. It's that feeling of, and you may even want to allow yourself some of the few breaths with deep sighs to really let go in the tissues. And so our perception, our ri'iyah, when we're practicing edut, is really, it's a perception that's comes through a place of rest. So it's not just looking and noticing with curiosity. It's more like it's really being held with love And I always think, I may have shared this with some of you before. I always think of my wife's Bubby Goldie, Kanenahara. She's 100 years old. And when we have a family gathering, one can see Bubby Goldie. I watch Bubby Goldie witnessing. And she sits there, and you could tell she just holds everybody with such love. She doesn't take a moment of it for granted. It's not trying to fix, it's just holding with love. And that to me is the epitome of Edut. Like we're witnessing the creation. We're witnessing this life as it unfolds, really trying to hold it with this quality of rest, of love, allowing ourselves temporarily to sink in to an experience in which we're not just looking at the movement of the leaves and noticing what's broken or problematic or needs to be solved. That's there. But we're also really holding and open to a wide view in which we can rest and take refuge in this practice, knowing that it's going to deepen each of our capacities for being in the world of movement, a world that needs fixing, and responding to a world that needs love. We deepen our capacity by really going into this quality of edut, of presence, of minucha, of rest. So let's sit. now seal our practice with Mourner's Kaddish. So if you'd like to join in a moment, you'll see it on your screen. I like to remember when I say Kaddish that it's really encouraging us to go big, open our hearts. So I invite you to join together. Let's say Kaddish. Yit Gadal, Vit Kadash, Shemei Rabbah. Ma Divrach,
The Lord is my Kohen,
Shmei Rabba
Shmei
Mivarach,
Rabba Mevarach,
Tadar Vitamam Vitse, Tadar Vitale Vitalal Shmei Kshira Brichu, Birchata B'Shirata, Shchata B'Nechamata, Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, Yisrael Kol Yisrael,
Shalom
Shalom B'Ramav,
Shalom
Yaseh Shalom,
Yaseh Shalom
El,
Aleinu
Yoshvei
V'Yakol
Tevel.
Yisrael Yakol Yisrael
Amen.
V'Yakol Yoshvei
Amen.
Tevel Yakol Ha'olam V'Imu Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody. Really grateful to you all for being here. We'll be back on Monday. If you are able to stick around for another 15 minutes, and I thought we could look at that Sfat Emet text a little more closely, please stay with us. If not, Shabbat Shalom, and have a wonderful weekend. Look forward to reconnecting next week. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And it's especially helpful if you could write question in all caps at the beginning of your question. That'll just help me see it. So, and Harry, maybe if you could just share the source sheet again, the second page. Thank you. And I think everybody has access to the document as well, so you could download it and print it. So again, this comes from the Sfat Emet, and it's on Parshat Va'etchanan, which we read a few weeks ago, and was given in the year 1901. So the Sfat Emet says this, Ubeshabbat nivtach li b'nei Yisrael hapnimiyut v'hu yoma dezachira. And on Shabbat, the inner essence, the pnimiyut, is opened to the children of Israel, as it is a day of mindful remembrance. So that's how I translated Yoma de Zechira, which is the Aramaic formulation of, in Hebrew would be something like Yom Shel Zechira. Again, it's just Aramaic for that. And it's the language that is found in the Zohar referring to Shabbat as a day of remembrance. This concept of remembrance, Zechira, is a really very powerful one, and one that I know I've taught about it in this forum before, that Zechira, remembrance, is understood to be more than just a kind of a passive recollection. Like, oh yeah, I remember that. But it's understood as a deep remembrance, something that when you remember it, it changes how your consciousness is. You remember something, and then it changes the internal experience. So, and fun fact is that the original Buddhist word that was translated as mindfulness, sati or smriti in Sanskrit or Pali, is also means remembrance. So there's I think a much to be mined in Jewish in the context of Jewish meditation in exploring how zechira is an element of mindfulness, a key element. And I should just say, you probably experience this when you're sitting in meditation or when you're walking through your life and you find yourself just habitually reacting to something that's going on internally or externally. And then you remember, oh yeah, my intention was to be present, or my intention was to actually listen to what this person is saying. My intention is whatever it may be, to be open-hearted, etc. That moment of remembrance is what empowers and energizes our capacity to return, to do teshuvah and come back to presence. So it's really a key part of our mindfulness practice, and it's such a key part of Jewish practice. And here it's seen as an essential component of a Shabbat practice. That Shabbat, just to continue, and about Shabbat it is written, and you should go check out those 2 verses in Deuteronomy. The reason for the exodus from Egypt was so that the souls of Israel would be given the power to go out from the natural tendency for forgetting and concealing the inner essence, and to enter into a state of mindful remembrance. So the nefashot b'nei Yisrael latzeit min hateva hamishakeach umastir hapnimiyut ve'lichnos lezechira. So this idea that, as kind of epitomized by the exodus from Egypt, each of us experiences that kind of the experience of Mitzrayim, that constricted experience of being disconnected from vitality, from life force. So when the Sfat Emet talks about that we have the natural tendency to forget and to conceal our inner essence, that is just the natural tendency. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, would often say, the opposite of mindfulness is forgetfulness. So much of the time, not because we're bad people, but it's just the nature of the mind, we are in the state of forgetfulness. So the power of coming out of that place of forgetfulness in which we're disconnected from vitality and life force and presence and our inner light, our inner spark of holiness, our inner divinity, it's not that that's gone away, it's concealed. And so to remember that and reconnect with that inner light source, that is the exodus from Egypt, which we identify as Shabbat being a remembrance of that. That's what we say in Friday Night Kiddush. And it's this internal process as well. But it's coming into a state of zechira, of remembrance, mindful remembrance. V'zehu ikara menucha dichtiv vayanach b'yom hashvi'i. This is the essence of Shabbat rest, menucha, that, quoting Exodus, God rested on the 7th day. Vayanach, and God rested, gematria aid, has the same gematria, the same numerical equivalent as the word aid, witness. For everything was created for God's glory. Shekol lichvodo bara, b'nei Yisrael shenivra'u lehaed et borei yitbarach ve'ateva mastir. So here the Sfat Emet doing a creative play with the gematria, the numerology, if you add up the Hebrew words for "and God rested," it is the same number, 74, as the word for witness, which is kind of a cute way, but of connecting them for me. But the deeper meaning is incredibly profound. That witnessing is that the witnessing that we're talking about on Shabbat flows from an experience of menucha. It's an expression of menucha. because I could imagine witnessing that would be very critical and harsh. This is a different kind of witnessing. Like I shared earlier, I epitomize it in my own mind and heart with this image of Bubby Goldie witnessing the family. So, and then he goes on to say, "V'zehu al-milchama be'olam hazeh." This is the struggle. This is the battle in the world that we live in. She'asitra achra omed levatel zeh ha'idut, that the other side tries to nullify this witnessing. If you're interested in understanding this idea of the Sitra Achra, definitely, as we say, tzarich iyun. There's a lot to say about it, but just the thumbnail I would say is it's essentially the sages trying to understand how can evil exist in a world in which God is all powerful. And so it's a mystical, comes out of our mystical tradition, and the Kabbalists understanding this kind of shadow side developing, kind of off of the one. Again, check it out, go Google it, ask ChatGPT to tell you more about it. There are a lot of different ways of understanding it. But essentially, I think it really, for me, most relevant in the context of my practice in my life, is it saying something we know. There are bad things that happen. There's brokenness, there's darkness, there's violence. And so all those things have the effect, the consequence, the natural consequence of keeping us from being able to be in the state of loving witnesses, of being these witnesses from this place of rest. And so the Sfat Emet says, Uba Shabbat vayanach, kumo ve'hanacha lemedinot asa. And on Shabbat, one rests, as is written, the king gave rest to the nations. So Shabbat is seen as a kind of a counterpoint, corrective for our souls in recharging, re-souling, vayinafash, re-souling ourselves, and connecting with this quality of being loving witnesses of the beauty of creation as it is. Because then that flows into how we're, witnessing and able to be present. And that's a wellspring from which we can draw as we move forward into the rest of our lives. And then just here quickly to finish, V'sahaduta ikri shebesh Shabbat yecholin la'id al haboreh v'zeh tachlit hamenucha. Shabbat is called testimony, quoting the Zohar, that on Shabbat one is able to bear witness to the Creator. And this is the culmination of Shabbat rest, the tachlit hamenucha. So the culmination of being able to practice and experience this kind of rest, this kind of being in our bodies and our lives as if we have already arrived, as if we're not broken, is to be able to come to this place of witnessing the beauty of creation. So that's the teaching from the Sfat Emet, and I love how he, really enters into the conversation or the exploration of what is Eidut and how is it connected to this inner quality of Menucha. So I'm aware of the time. Let me just see if there are any questions I could pick up on. Seeing and witnessing in Jewish law as it seems helpful in being with others and myself. So what I could say briefly about the difference between seeing and witnessing is, in Jewish law, a big component of what happens, imagine you see something happening, being able to testify about it in a way that is you staking your reputation on what you're saying requires really believing in what you've seen. Also, you always need at least two witnesses, which is another key element of this. Anybody can see anything, but for it to really be testimony, it's part of an experience that has always two witnesses. There's a lot more to say about that. But I think ultimately, it's about, like, for me, the application from Jewish law in terms of my regular life and my practice is that I'm really trying to cultivate a quality of presence that supports my capacity to really be present as a witness. If I'm too focused on my worries, my resentments, my human smallness crowds out my capacity for being present, then I'm not a good witness. I'm not able to be present to the truth of another human being. It's very difficult to witness that in a way that has integrity. You know, sometimes I'll say something to somebody and I realize, like, I don't think they actually heard me. And I don't really ever do this, but sometimes I want to say, can you repeat back to me what I just said to you? Sometimes I say that to my kids. And of course, to be able to say it back shows that one witness saw it, perceived it, heard it, but then internalized it and could then say it back. And so that is moving from just perceiving, ri'iyah, into witnessing. Okay, we're at our time. I want to wish everybody a beautiful Shabbat, and really grateful for your presence and your practice. And as always, it's beautiful to leave with unanswered questions, and we'll, God willing, pick up on them in the future. Have a wonderful Shabbat, and take good care. And thanks again, Harry, for the tech support. Bye-bye.